Welcome to the interview show. This is Scott Wood, your host, and we are sitting in the tour van of Liars. I would love it if the member of the Liars that I have with me could introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Angus, and I'm in the van, and it's smelly like a man.
Yeah, and you have one of those vans that has the extra little bit on top.
Yeah, you need that if you're going to stand up during some long road trips, which is what I like to do.
And in what situation would you need to stand?
Oh, just to stretch the old legs there, you know, to be able to reach in different areas as opposed to being caught in one seated position for hours on end. Hi, this is Angus. I'm in the Liars van with Scott Wood, and you're listening to the interview show with Mr. Scott Wood.
Can you do one more straight up one?
Yeah. Hi, this is Angus from Liars. You're listening to the interview show with Scott Wood.
back to the interview show. This is Scott Wood, your host. I'm in Liar's tour van. I've got Angus with me. You've just heard number one, Against the Rush, off their current record, Wish You. Angus, I'd love to hear a little bit about that track.
Yeah, well, this is a good example of the way we worked on this record was really that we gave ourselves a huge amount of time, almost about 6 months at the beginning of the writing process, just to experiment with sound and literally just to mess around with creating new and interesting sounds. And the sound that you hear at the start of number one ended up being one of our favorites. But, after 6 months, we realized, we've got all these great sounds, but we got no songs. So the real challenge was trying to sort of make a song that warranted this kind of song or sound or really kind of did it justice. And number one was probably the hardest in that sense, because I think we all really loved this sound, but we didn't know how to make a song that was sort of worthy of it.
Makes sense. All right, so let's start. Best lie you've been told lately?
Best lie I've been told?
Yeah.
Oh, God, it should be something political, but again, that's always a lie. I don't know, that someone likes my record, probably. That's probably the biggest lie I hear constantly.
How do you smoke those lies out?
I don't know if you need to. I think sometimes lies are put in given a bit of a negative rub, and I think you can look at it in a positive way sometimes, where it's someone using their imagination, and I kind of like that about lies.
The new Liars record is called Wish You, which is spelled WIXIW. I would love it if you could talk about that.
Yeah, obviously it's a made-up way of spelling Wish You. I think, graphically, it's kind of just a pretty powerful-looking sort of image in and of itself. And then, and I like that it's a palindrome, they're always fun. The idea of sort of beginning somewhere and then ending up at the same spot, which a lot of people seem to think is a kind of a negative result, like going back to square one, but I in the creative process I see it as a really sort of reassuring thing.
Like whatever you go through, you'll remain the same?
Yeah, you have an idea and then you spend a lot of time experimenting with other ideas, but then in the end you come back to that initial idea and go, I think that's actually good, and in a way it's been reaffirmed by the fact that you've tried a lot of other ways of doing it. Cool.
So how did you come up with WIXIW?
It was pretty random, actually. I think it, mostly it came just as a scratch title. Basically, when you're working in something like Pro Tools, you need to name the file before you even start making the song, which is kind of strange, So you have to just kind of we have a million of these kind of titles, but this one definitely just stuck out, like I said, just because it was so visually kind of strong.
My favorite Liars quote is, "The truth is much more boring than coming up with something kind of interesting that's a lie." I was hoping that you could relate that to the music on the record.
When we came up with the band name Liars, the one main reason was that we wanted to be really honest about our music making, and so in a sense, by admitting that we were liars, we were trying to be as forthright as possible, and I think with this record particularly, we were really kind of overtly honest about our sort of inner turmoil, and it's kind of the first time that we've been that kind of frank about it, and honestly it's a little embarrassing.
I was reading about that, how you guys on this record started to discuss your inner feelings with each other. You guys are 10 years in as a band, so what's it like to sort of peel back that onion layer of each other?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I look at it now, I realize that we have been doing that in a way with our other records, but our method of doing that was to sort of pick a subject matter that was more objective, like Los Angeles or, I don't know, witch trials or something, and then kind of project those inner feelings onto that subject matter. So in a way, the feelings themselves aren't that new or shocking for us to reveal to each other. But it's the first time where we've peeled it back and sort of put the mirror up to ourselves and really just let it be that this is what we're talking about. Hi, I'm Angus in the band Liars. You're listening to The Interview Show with Scott Wood.
Welcome back to the interview show. This is Scott Wood, your host. You just heard Brats by Liars off their current record, WIXIW. I've got Angus from the band with me, and I would love to hear about this track. It's my favorite.
Ooh, well, that's nice of you to say. Yeah, Brats is an example of a song which I think we wrote a lot more of in the process. In a way, working within the computer, in some sense, it kind of pushes you to write more songs like this in terms of a sort of a 4/4 dance kind of beat, and so we made a lot of stuff like this. In the end, we agreed that Brats would be the one that we put on the record because, in a sense, it sort of reminded us of some songs that we made earlier on in our career, and so it was interesting to have this kind of revolution and coming back to the same spot, but using a completely different technique.
Cool. So Aaron has referred to your musical decisions as giving the middle finger to music critics. So what's the biggest fuck you on WIXIW?
Shit, I don't know. I would say that it's difficult to pronounce the title, but we actually made a really significant effort to get in touch with journalists early on and let them know how it was supposed to be pronounced. So I don't know what the biggest middle finger is. And I don't know about that quote either. It's a little weird that he said that. But, maybe it's just, again, this sort of difficulty, I think, of putting us in a box, giving us a label or a genre that we're working in, and I guess this one's, again, it's a little tricky. I mean, we did make an electronic record, but I don't kind of really think it's like a classic sort of electronic record. It's kind of a mix of things, and I guess we just make it, instead of saying the middle finger, I think that we just don't make it easy on journalists to put us in these spots where it's easy to describe what we're doing.
Cool. So isolation is a big part of your working process. That's a difficult thing for a lot of people, so I was hoping you could give some survival tactics for working alone.
Well, that's interesting because, for me, that's probably the easiest scenario to be in, is to be isolated. I have more trouble when I'm, surrounded by people. But the best survival instinct, I think, is just to let it all go. Let yourself sort of discover what happens when you're alone, because I think some things come out, especially in extended periods of time, that you may not have been able to discover if you were sort of surrounded by people all the time. So I would just say, just go with it and let your freak flag high.
For most career bands, the challenge is changing the music enough, but keeping it similar enough to sound the same. I was hoping to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think we've ever had this sort of overall sort of career objective in that way. I mean, my opinion is just like, make music that continues to excite you and inspire you. And if that is, making the same kind of record over and over, I don't think that that's a horrible thing. I mean, I think the bands like the Ramones and things did that to a sort of great extent, and it's really admirable. For me personally, I just find it really difficult to stick to one sort of way of working, and it's kind of imperative to try and look for different ways of expressing ourselves musically to keep myself excited.
Yeah, for sure. And you guys are loved for daring to reinvent yourselves record from record. So do you ever look back sometimes and get sentimental for past sounds of the Liars?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, sometimes I think about ways of working that were kind of cool. You know, obviously, you know, well, I mean, maybe it's not so obvious, but it seems like each record, it gets more and more complex, and in a way it gets more difficult to make a record. And so if I harken back to anything, it's kind of this idea of making music with more nonchalance and not caring so much about the outcome, you know, and in a way that's obviously really liberating. So it'd be great to go back to this position where it's sort of like, let's just go and record this for a day and put it out, you know. Hi, I'm Angus in the band Liars. You're listening to The Interview Show with Scott Wood.
Welcome back to The Interview Show. This is Scott Wood, your host. You've just heard Scarecrows on a Killer Slant by Liars. That was off their previous record, Sisterworld, and I wanted to play a part of it so that you could sort of hear the difference between the previous record and this record. And now that I've got Angus with me, I was hoping to get him to comment on it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, on that last record, there were things that were more important to me in a sort of different way in terms of making music. Like, I really was interested in this idea of, you know, writing songs, particularly in a more sort of traditional way where there's a kind of a verse, chorus, verse. I saw that as an interesting experiment and a challenge. And I also was really interested in more traditional instruments and sort of pushing use of those more than we have in the past. I'm really happy with that record in that sense. But as with all Lies records, you can see that once we sort of go through a period of experimenting with one idea, we kind of exhaust it, and in a way it points us towards what will happen next. So it's often a very reactionary approach.
So when you've been a more rock-sounding band and you move to an electronic sound, you've got to change or reconstitute the older material for the live show. So I was hoping you could talk about the challenges of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely the most difficult record to translate into the live scenario, and I think the biggest thing about that for me is this idea of working within the computer when you're making the music. You have this kind of really abstract relationship with the sounds that you're creating. It's not this kind of regular physical connection that you would have playing guitars and rock music, where you're actually physically moving things around and you can see the result of that movement in the sounds that you're making. When you're working on the computer, it's very, like I said, disassociated and abstract in the sense it's like mouse clicks and keyboard strokes. So the key really in putting it into a live setting is trying to re-inject that kind of physicality into the music, and that's what we've been focusing on.
So you're on tour now. Can you talk about maybe some of the ways it's been going great and some of the ways it could improve?
It's been going great in the sense that it's challenging and it's still very kind of experimental, and I relish that part of sort of the early touring process before you really get it all sort of figured out, because then after a while it starts to get whatever. So I like certain songs have come out that I didn't think would work so well. Particularly some songs that I knew were going to be really difficult to recreate, and I've been surprised that they've actually come off sort of better than I anticipated. Maybe a song like the title track "WIXIW," which is kind of a really difficult one even to think about how to do it, and we figured that out. But all in all, I kind of, like I said, I like this idea of when we play live for the possibility of things to go wrong. We're not a band that's out here to try and sort of replicate the record like you hear it at home. It's a more sort of situationist approach, I think, where we enjoy fuck ups or the possibility of things falling apart, and I think that gives it sort of a special edge.
Nice. Angus, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you.
At the end of the show, I love it if I can get the guest to take one track and talk a little bit about it as I bring up the music.
Well, Octagon is the second track on the record, and it's always been one of my favorites. I think what's interesting about making music or making records and also playing live is that it's a pretty sure bet that the one that I like the most is not the one that people like the most, and I find that really strange when you're sort of making the music, and it's the same with playing live. It's like, I'll think a show was really terrible, and then people will say it was a great show, and vice versa. So it's really interesting to get different opinions and things.
Awesome. So we're going to listen to Octagon by Liars off their record "WIXIW."
Octagon.
What did I say?
You said it right, and then I just reaffirmed.
Okay. All right. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, this is Angus. I'm in the Liars van with Scott Wood, and you're listening to the interview show with Mr. Scott Wood.
Can you do one more straight up one?
Yeah. Hi, this is Angus from Liars. You're listening to the interview show with Scott Wood.